Good morning and welcome to Philosophy Bites, Immanuel Kant on abortion and euthanasia. We are going to discuss Kant's views on ethics. We're going to talk about lots of Kantian terms and then we're going to apply it to the idea of abortion or euthanasia. So, we're going to start in the top left hand corner. We're going to do duty. For Kant, the motive of moral action should always be duty. Now, the phrase that he uses for duty is just the next one along: reverence for the law. Almost like worshipping the law because it's right. Okay, it's right because it's right, not because of any other reasons like self-interest. Kant then talks about immediate inclination. Immediate inclination is like your emotional reaction to something. I would use the example of road rage. If you act on your immediate inclination when somebody shouts and swears at you when you're driving your car, and if you stick your two fingers at them or swear at them, you're just acting on your immediate inclinations. And it's like your gut reaction. And for Kant, you're not actually being free. That's how Kant connects his ethical theory with the idea of free will. Self-interest, well, think about the example of Barclays at Children in Need giving a huge big check to charity. If they do that, they're just acting on their own interests because they're trying to promote their business. It's a little bit like, in a church on a Sunday, like a Catholic church, when they collect money in, they collect it in envelopes so that people can't see exactly how another one's giving, so you can't be all big-headed about how much you're giving. Categorical means applies to all situations. Next one along, hypothetical imperative. A hypothetical imperative for Kant can never be a moral motive. So a hypothetical imperative is a means to an end. It's like, I will be nice to somebody in order to go to heaven in the next life. I will give money to charity to experience pleasure. That is never a moral motive for Kant for action. I will steal in order to save a life. So it's kind of opposite to utilitarianism. My favourite example of Kant's is the greengrocer example, and I think of it as an old lady. An old lady goes into a greengrocer's shop, and the greengrocer is deciding whether or not to shortchange her. He decides in the end that he's not going to shortchange her, he's going to give her the right change. Why might that be? Well, Kant says it could be out of self-interest to promote his business so that he doesn't get a bad reputation if he steals from her. So hoping that she'll tell other people to go to his shop. It could be for immediate inclination. He might just be feeling emotionally kind that day towards the old lady or sympathetic. But then on another day, his dog might have died and he might think, I'm going to rip her off. So if you act on your immediate inclinations, you aren't consistent in your actions. The next thing is universalizable. You start off with what's called a maxim, which is the rule, the moral rule you want to universalize, and then you think, what would happen if everybody did this? What would happen if everybody did this? Would it be a contradiction as a law of nature, or would it be a contradiction in the will, or not? Contradiction as a law of nature. The first example Kant gives, it's always better to use Kant's own examples, is he talks about borrowing money off somebody with having no intention of paying it back. He says, if we universalize this, would it be a contradiction as a law of nature? Well, let's imagine everybody that borrowed money refused to pay it back. Banks wouldn't exist. Nobody would trust anybody else, because when you borrow money, you're relying on the rule of trust and then you're choosing to break it. So it is a contradiction as a law of nature, so therefore it's wrong. The next example Kant gives, if it passes the test of being not a contradiction as a law of nature, is whether it's a contradiction in the will. One of the examples Kant gives of this is of a person walking past a homeless person on the street, and they're thinking, should I give them money or not? Now, to choose not to give them money, would it be a contradiction as a law of nature if every time that happened, nobody gave money? Well, Kant says no, it wouldn't be a contradiction as a law of nature, but would you actually will it as a universal law? Would you change it so it became a universal law that nobody ever helped the homeless? And Kant says, no way would you do that, because as a rational being, you might end up in a situation where you end up homeless, and therefore you'd be willing it that nobody else helped you in that situation. So I see the CI, the next one down. We're on the second one down on the left. CI filter. I think the CI acts as a filter to decide whether something's right or wrong. The next thing along is the humanity formula. The humanity formula is the idea that you should never simply treat someone as a means to an end. You should always at the same time treat them as an end in themselves, an end in itself. So what does that actually mean? My example for this would be getting in a taxi drunk. You get in a taxi drunk and you give him directions, and you're pissed, and you actually say to him, well, you know, I want to go there, I want to go there. You throw up in the back of his taxi. If you treat a taxi driver simply as a means to an end, you might think, I can treat the taxi driver like crap because I've already given him the money. If you respect him as a rational being that also makes choices like you will treat him as an end in itself. So never treat somebody simply as a means to an end. Treat them as an end in itself. This idea comes from Aristotle. Aristotle says to achieve eudaimonia, or self-flourishing, you never treat somebody as a means to an end. You always treat them as an end in themselves. You treat them with intrinsic value. Intrinsic rather than instrumental value. So one of the criticisms of Kant is that he is a bit inflexible, and this is where we bring in the axe murder example. The axe murder example is, Kant says, well, what about lying? Let's universalize the idea of never lying. And Kant thinks that you should universalize never lying. It's not a contradiction as a law of nature, and it's not a contradiction in the will. But the criticism of that is, what if you were standing on a street outside a shop, and then a guy comes running past you freaking out and runs off down an alleyway? He's then chased by an axe murderer, and the axe murderer stops and says to you, which way did he go? Kant thinks that even in that situation, it is absolutely wrong to lie. So think about utilitarianism on that. What would utilitarians say about that example? Would it be right to tell the axe murderer where he went or not? Now we're finally on to Kant's applied ethics. Kant's applied ethics. We're going to talk about the idea of an embryo or a fetus. So, the interesting thing is Kant actually never directly said anything about abortion. So we have to try and interpret his theory. And one way we can do that is using the humanity formula. Should we treat someone as a means to an end? If we think that we're going to have an abortion, we are treating the embryo or the fetus as a means to an end. The end might be freedom. I can't handle this responsibility, therefore I'm going to abort. That's also a hypothetical imperative. So if I can't, because saying, oh, I can't afford to feed my children, therefore I'm going to have an abortion, is wrong. It's actually intrinsically wrong. And Aristotle would agree that an embryo or fetus is potentially a rational person. For Kant, being a rational person is very important as well. So we can indirectly apply Kant's humanity formula to abortion, but what it depends upon is whether you actually think that a fetus or an embryo counts as a person. Remember, an embryo is in the early stages, the first 12 weeks of the pregnancy, and then a fetus is after about 3 months is when it's more developed. So we know that it's a potential life form, it's a potential human being, and it's potentially a rational being as well. So therefore you could say, according to Kant, abortion is wrong. Lastly, euthanasia. Now, Kant actually uses slightly different this, but it's related. Kant uses the example of suicide, and he says, is suicide a contradiction as a law of nature? Would you will it as a universal law to commit suicide if you're depressed? Well, for a start, I am depressed, or I have a terminal illness, therefore I'm going to get rid of my future suffering. For Kant would be a hypothetical imperative, so therefore not moral. Hypothetical imperatives can never be a moral motive for action. And for Kant, if it's not moral, then you don't do it. But also, think of suicide as relating to self-interest as well. It's like, I'm going to do something for myself. In order to do something for myself, i.e. kill yourself, you get rid of your suffering, but then you destroy yourself as a rational being. So Kant says that's a contradiction as a law of nature. How could, as a rational being, will it to destroy your own rationality? I hope you found this interesting and enlightening. Now it's down to you. So A-level students, write at least 2 paragraphs using as many keywords as possible. The more you use, the more sophisticated your answer will be. And I've deliberately used Kant's own examples. Kant's very good at giving actual examples himself. He's awesome at that, in fact. Good luck, everybody. If you've liked this presentation, please post a like or subscribe to the channel, and put some comments in the box if you want to share your own thoughts about abortion and Kant and euthanasia. Thank you very much.